Coda had crossed the plains many times, but that morning the ride felt different. The wind carried the last breath of winter, and the sun still lingered low on the horizon as he guided his pinto stallion toward the town of Red Creek. He wasn't coming for his own reasons. He came because friendship demanded it. Elias Carter, rancher, widower, stubborn as a mule, had taken a bad fall 2 weeks earlier and shattered his leg. He couldn't get out of bed, much less ride into town to meet the woman who had agreed to be his mail-order bride. "You're the only one I trust to fetch her," Elias had said. Jaw clenched against the pain. Coda didn't refuse friends. So he saddled up, though he expected the task to be awkward. Red Creek was already awake when he arrived. Chickens clucked behind the boarding house, shopkeepers swept wooden porches, and the telegraph office clicked softly as the operator tapped out morning messages. The train whistle screamed long before the engine appeared, sending dust swirling through the street. Koda dismounted near the platform, brushing dust from his buckskin coat. He knew what he expected to see: a quiet, nervous woman stepping off the train with a single carpet bag, eyes down, voice soft, hoping for a new start. That's how many mail-order brides arrived, alone, determined, uncertain. He wasn't ready for what actually came. The train hissed to a stop, iron wheels screeching. Passengers spilled out: merchants, soldiers, 2 families, a preacher. Then 2 young women stepped down together. The first was small and delicate, her blonde hair braided neatly, blue eyes wide with timid curiosity. She clutched a hat box in both hands like she feared it might be snatched away. Her dress was plain but carefully mended, a hopeful attempt at looking ready for a new life. But the second woman, she stole the breath right out of Coda's chest. She stood taller than her sister, with dark auburn hair pinned in a way that made loose tendrils fall over her cheek. Her gaze was confident, sharp, and observant, like someone who had learned to trust herself long before trusting others. When she stepped onto the platform, the sun caught the copper in her hair, and something in her posture told him she wasn't there to be led anywhere without asking her own questions. They were sisters, he saw that instantly in their shared features, but everything else about them was opposite. Lydia, he guessed, was the quiet one, the careful one. And the other had a fire in her eyes. Mara. He wouldn't know her name yet. But later he would remember this first moment with painful clarity. The second sister lifting her chin, sweeping her gaze across the platform, locking eyes with him like she'd been expecting him. Coda wasn't easily shaken. He'd grown up riding rocky ridges, hunting through wild canyons, and negotiating peace between ranchers and his own people when tempers ran hot. But nothing had prepared him for the jolt that shot through him when Mara gave him a slow, knowing half-smile. As if she already saw more in him than he'd spoken, he reminded himself why he was there. Elias, the bride, the duty. He walked forward, boots thudding softly on the wood planks. "Lydia Carter?" he asked gently. The quiet sister flinched, then nodded. "Why, yes, that's me." But her voice shook, and her gaze darted nervously to the bold sister beside her. Before Coda could speak again, the second woman stepped forward, crossing her arms. "And you must be the friend," she said, tone brisk. "The one Elias sent." Coda blinked. "I am Coda. I came to bring Miss Lydia safely to the ranch." Lydia offered a weak smile, but it was Mara who answered. "Well, someone had to come," Mara said, lifting her chin. "Lydia shouldn't be traveling alone." Coda studied them. Something felt off. Lydia looked like a woman trying to disappear. Mara looked like a woman who would fight anyone who threatened her. And neither expression matched the sweetness of a hopeful bride's arrival. Coda didn't know the truth yet, that Lydia wasn't the one who wanted this marriage, and that Mara had risked everything to protect her sister. All he knew was that he'd come to escort one woman, and somehow, in the space of a single heartbeat, found himself unable to look away from the other. Mara's stare was the kind that made a man reconsider everything he thought he knew in a matter of seconds. Coda had come to fetch Lydia, the promised bride. But it was Mara who stepped between them like a shield calm. Certain and far too observant. Lydia, on the other hand, stood half hidden behind her sister, fingers twisted around the handle of her hat box. When Coda tried offering a reassuring smile, she responded with a small, grateful nod, but her eyes kept flicking to Mara, as though silently asking permission to breathe. He didn't miss that. Your sister has traveled a long way, Coda said, addressing both of them. He kept his voice gentle, not wanting to spook Lydia any further. Elias is expecting her. Lydia's shoulders tensed at the name, though she tried to mask it. Yes, she whispered. Of course. But Mara folded her arms, her dark brows drawing together. Lydia is tired, and she's not accustomed to meeting strangers immediately after stepping off a train. Coda blinked slowly. Mara's tone wasn't unkind, but it was firm, protective in a way that revealed months, maybe years, of standing guard for her younger sister. I only wish to make her journey easier, he said carefully, and I only wish to make sure she's treated fairly. There it was again, that spark. Mara wasn't rude. She was simply the sort of woman who didn't let anything slide unquestioned. Coda found himself admiring it even as it unsettled him. Most women he'd met kept their voices soft when speaking to men they didn't know. But Mara wasn't afraid of being heard. He turned to Lydia. May I carry your things to the wagon? Lydia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mara spoke for her instead. She has only this bag. The rest is in the trunk. Coda suppressed a smile. Mara wasn't going to let Lydia speak unless Lydia truly wanted to. Then allow me, he said. He reached for the trunk sitting beside them. As he lifted it easily, he noticed Lydia watching him with a mixture of awe and nervousness. But Mara? She eyed him like she was measuring his soul, and she wasn't sure she approved. They walked together toward the wagon Elias had loaned him. Lydia followed quietly, but Mara walked beside Coda, matching his stride as though she were his equal, and in every way that mattered, she was. You work for Elias? She asked. I am his friend, Coda answered. We trade horses. Help each other when needed. So you don't live on his ranch? No, my home is east, in the foothills. She nodded, filing that information away in her mind. And Elias? Is he kind? Ah, so that was the worry. Coda considered his answer. Elias was gruff, yes. Sometimes blunt. A man shaped by droughts, cattle losses, and the grief of losing his wife. But he wasn't cruel. He simply didn't always know how to speak gently. He is a good man, Coda said honestly. Not perfect, but good. Lydia exhaled shakily, as though she'd been holding that breath for miles. Mara didn't look convinced, but at least she didn't challenge him. When they reached the wagon, Coda set the trunk inside. Lydia climbed up first with an awkward stiffness, arranging her skirt carefully as she sat on the bench. But Mara didn't join her. She stood beside Coda, hands on her hips, chin lifted. You'll look after her, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. I will, he promised. And you'll make sure Elias understands she's delicate, of course. And if he speaks harshly to her, Mara, Lydia whispered urgently. Mara stopped. Coda watched as she inhaled slowly, as though forcing her own fire back down. Then she looked Lydia in the eyes, softened, and cupped her cheek gently. You don't have to be brave every second, she murmured. I'll do that part. The tenderness in her voice made something twist inside Coda's chest. These two had been through something. Something heavy enough that Lydia couldn't even speak for herself without fear. and heavy enough that Mara had learned to speak for two. When Mara finally climbed into the wagon beside her sister, Coda found his gaze drifting to her again, studying her posture, her strength. The stubborn tilt of her jaw. He could not help it. She wasn't the bride. He'd been sent to collect. She wasn't the woman promised to another man. But as the horses began to pull the wagon out of Red Creek, Coda already knew the truth he wasn't ready to voice. It was Mara, not Lydia, who had captured him from the moment she stepped off the train. The road from Red Creek to Elias's ranch wound through miles of open prairie, dipping into shallow valleys and rising again toward the distant hills. It was a quiet route, usually peaceful, but today the silence felt dense, filled with tension that didn't belong to the land at all. Koda rode beside the wagon, reins loose in his hands. His stallion moved easily, ears flicking back whenever the sisters spoke. Lydia sat straight-backed on the wagon bench, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. Her gaze stayed fixed on the road ahead, as if she feared looking anywhere else would expose how frightened she truly was. But Mara? Mara sat slanted slightly toward Coda, elbow resting casually on the wooden seat, eyes bright with restless energy. She wasn't afraid of the open land or the stranger riding beside her. If anything, she looked like she might leap down and explore every cactus, rock, and stretch of wild grass if given permission. After nearly a mile of silence, Mara broke it. "So," she called, her voice riding the breeze, "do you always look so serious? Or is that just for today?" Coda blinked. He wasn't used to women teasing him openly, not within the first hour of meeting him. Not in that tone, either. Playful yet sharp enough to reveal she wanted real answers. "I'm focused on the road," he replied. "It's a road, not a riddle," Mara said, leaning forward. "Unless your horse is new to walking in straight lines?" Coda gave her a long look. If she noticed, she didn't flinch, she only raised an eyebrow, daring him to respond. "My horse has more sense than most people," he said finally. Mara smirked. "Well, then he and I have something in common." Lydia sucked in a nervous breath. "Mara, oh hush," Mara whispered to her sister. "If we're going to be traveling for hours, someone has to fill the silence." "You certainly won't." Coda tried not to smile. He failed. He watched Lydia from the corner of his eye, how her shoulders rose slightly every time Mara spoke, how they fell again when Mara leaned over to rub her back or whisper something reassuring. These two were stitched together by more than blood. Bond like that didn't grow out of nothing. It grew out of something painful. Half an hour passed before Lydia finally whispered, "Is it always this empty out here?" Coda softened his tone for her. "Not empty. Just open. What's the difference?" she asked, voice trembling. Mara looked at her sister with gentle exasperation. "You're safe, Lydia. There's nothing out here but wind." "And coyotes," Coda added. Lydia stiffened. Mara glared at him. "You're not helping." "It was a joke," Coda said, though he hadn't meant to frighten Lydia at all. Mara shook her head, then turned her sharp gaze to him. "You're terrible at jokes. You started the teasing." "I tease for fun." "You tease by accident." Coda's lips twitched. She wasn't wrong. After another mile, Lydia finally spoke the truth weighing on her. "It's just, everything is so big out here." At home the buildings were close, the streets narrow. But this, she gestured helplessly at the endless horizon. "It feels like the world could swallow me." Mara's teasing faded instantly. She reached across and grasped Lydia's hand, squeezing firmly. "It won't. I won't let it." Coda noticed how Lydia's breathing eased under that touch. He understood then the depth of Mara's presence. She wasn't bossy out of stubbornness. She was fierce because Lydia needed someone fierce. "Elias's ranch won't feel this wide," Coda assured them. "There are fences, barns, pastures, people. You won't feel lost there." Lydia nodded faintly. Mara studied Coda with something new in her eyes, not suspicion, but consideration. Approval, maybe. She wasn't quick to trust, but she was quick to judge a person's heart. And Coda felt strangely honored that she was judging his dot another mile past before she asked, "Why aren't you married?" The question hit him like a thrown rope. Coda doesn't need to answer that, Lydia whispered, horrified, but Coda answered anyway. "Because I haven't found someone who speaks with both truth and fire." Mara held his gaze for a dangerous, lingering heartbeat. Then she turned forward, her chin lifting. "Truth and fire," she murmured. "That's a rare combination." Coda said nothing, but inside, he already knew the truth he couldn't say aloud. He had found it. He had found it the moment Mara stepped off that train dot. By the time the wagon rumbled into the rolling hills that led toward Elias's ranch, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the morning chill off the land. Dust swirled behind the wagon wheels, settling in the horses' manes and on the sisters' skirts. Coda guided the horses with ease, but his thoughts were heavier than the load they pulled. The longer he spent with Mara, the more he felt the weight of his own unexpected distraction. Lydia sat quietly beside her sister, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the passing landscape. But her silence no longer felt like timidity. It was resignation, a soft, resigned acknowledgement that she had little choice in the life it had been arranged for her. Coda sensed it without her needing to speak. He had met many women in his travels, many who were timid, shy, or simply unsure of their place in the world. But Lydia carried a quiet sadness that went deeper than fear. It was the kind of sadness that comes when a person is expected to step into a life they do not want. And Mara was different. She leaned forward, elbows resting on the wagon's edge, bright eyes darting between Coda and the horizon. Her presence was magnetic. It was bold, sharp, and filled with an energy that was difficult to ignore. Every glance she cast toward him made him aware of the dangerous pull he felt, a pull he knew he shouldn't entertain. She wasn't the bride. She wasn't the woman he had come to escort. Yet the moment he had first seen her, the moment she had met his gaze with that fiery look, he knew she would linger in his mind, longer than he had ever allowed any woman to linger before. When they finally reached the edge of the ranch, Coda slowed the horses to a walk, then stopped to gather his thoughts. He had kept his focus on his duty this long, and yet he could no longer ignore the truth. Lydia did not want this marriage. Mara had come along to protect her sister, to keep her from a life she did not choose. Coda admired that. He respected that. And at the same time, he knew that his heart had betrayed him, drawn irrevocably toward the woman standing beside her sister. He guided the wagon to the barn, the boards creaking under the wheels. Lydia helped steady herself, though she still avoided looking at him, perhaps unsure of whether gratitude or guilt filled her chest. Mara, in contrast, climbed down with an ease that was almost predatory, the kind of grace that made it clear she would rather conquer the world than be conquered by it. As they entered the yard, Elias appeared, leaning on a wooden cane and squinting against the sun. He looked at Lydia, then at Mara, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. He was a man who noticed when things were not as they should be, when truths were unspoken. Coda sensed him measuring the situation even as he tried to conceal his curiosity. "You've come a long way," Elias said, his voice rough but not unkind. "I appreciate your efforts." He nodded toward Coda. "And thank you, friend." Coda dipped his head, the weight of duty still clinging to him. But he could not shake the private acknowledgement of Mara's presence. She had been the one to command his attention from the moment he had seen her, and she hadn't even meant to. Now, as she stood beside Lydia, he realized that her bravery, her confidence, and her fierce loyalty to her sister were qualities that no intended bride could compete with. In fact, They had ignited a fire within him that he did not fully understand, but could not ignore. Lydia finally spoke, her voice low and uncertain. I'm grateful for your help, she said. Her words were hesitant, almost apologetic, as though she felt she was taking up the space she wasn't supposed to. She glanced toward Mara, silently thanking her sister for stepping forward, for being the one who could face the world without fear, while she herself shrank into the background. Mara's gaze softened, the sharp edges of her expression giving way to quiet understanding. She reached out and touched her sister's shoulder lightly, a small gesture of reassurance. "It's all right," she said. "You did what you had to do." Koda watched the interaction, the admiration for Mara swelling in his chest. He felt protective of her in a way he had not expected. She had stepped into a role that was not hers to claim, but she had done so with courage and purpose. And in doing so, she had claimed a place in his heart he hadn't known he could give. As the sun climbed higher and the ranch came into view, Koda realized that the journey had changed more than just the route to Elias's property. It had shifted the course of his heart as well, drawing him toward a woman he should not have been thinking about, yet could not stop thinking about, and a sister whose bravery had illuminated a path he could not ignore. Elias Carter's ranch stretched across a gentle valley, barns and fences lined neatly against the horizon, cattle grazing lazily in the warm sun. As the wagon creaked to a stop near the main house, Koda hopped down and helped Lydia with her step. She trembled slightly, not from fear of the land, but from exhaustion and uncertainty. The journey had been long, the tension inside her suffocating. Every glance she cast at Mara betrayed a deep gratitude. The older sister had protected her in ways words could not fully express. Elias waited on the porch, leaning on a cane, the sun casting a long shadow across his weathered face. He was a man who had endured loss, hardship, and isolation, but the strength in his eyes remained intact. The moment he laid eyes on Lydia, he immediately noticed her hesitation, the way she avoided looking at him, and the subtle trembling in her hands. There was no malice in him, only observation, and as he took in the scene, he realized that the woman who had traveled so far was not here willingly. "Lydia," Elias said gently, his voice calm and commanding at once, "thank you for coming. I know this journey has been difficult." Lydia bowed her head slightly. I am here," she whispered, her words barely carrying over the warm wind. Koda, standing nearby, sensed Elias's sharp scrutiny. The rancher's eyes shifted from Lydia to Mara, who stood confidently beside her sister, chin lifted and eyes scanning the horizon as though assessing threats invisible to everyone else. Mara's posture was protective, not of herself, but of the quiet sister at her side. Elias nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You did not want this, did you?" he asked Lydia quietly. She flinched, unsure of how to answer. Mara's hand, resting lightly on Lydia's shoulder, gave her the courage to look up. "No," Lydia admitted, her voice trembling, but with a spark of honesty that could not be ignored. Koda's chest tightened. He had suspected this from the beginning, watching the way Lydia deferred to her sister, the way her eyes avoided his gaze, the careful restraint in her every movement. Yet hearing the truth spoken aloud made the reality undeniable. Elias straightened slightly, his gaze never leaving Lydia. "You owe me nothing," he said, voice firm but gentle. "Not your hand, not your life, not your loyalty. Only those things you can give freely." Relief washed over Lydia's face, and Koda felt the tension ease slightly. But his gaze kept returning to Mara. She stood there quietly, watching the exchange, her dark eyes measuring every word. She had orchestrated this protective deception, and Koda felt a surge of admiration for her courage. Mara had put herself in the line of responsibility to shield her sister from an unwanted future, and in doing so, She had claimed his attention in a way no one else could. Elias's attention shifted slightly, and for a moment, Coda thought he might have caught a flicker of curiosity in the man's eyes, an unspoken question about Mara's presence. Coda's jaw tightened. Mara was not the bride. She was the sister. And yet, Coda knew the truth of his own heart. Mara's fire had captured him long before he understood why. "You are both safe here," Elias continued, breaking Coda from his reverie. "I cannot force anyone into a life they do not wish to live. I will treat Lydia with respect, and she may return home if that is her choice. But you, Mara," his eyes lingered on the older sister, "you are welcome to stay. If your heart is tied to your sister's safety, then you may remain here until all arrangements are made." Mara's gaze shifted to Coda, a flicker of disbelief and hope mingling in her expression. Coda's heart raced as he realized the implications of Elias's words. Mara had been courageous enough to protect her sister, brave enough to challenge expectations. And now she had a choice she had never dared to consider for herself. Lydia looked at Mara, relief and love radiating in her eyes. She didn't need to speak. Her sister's presence had already said everything. Coda watched Mara's hand brush briefly against Lydia's arm, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had protected them both. And in that moment, Coda understood something essential. The woman he was drawn to was not the intended bride. She was the sister, the protector, the bold spirit who had captivated his heart from the first moment he saw her on the train platform. And for the first time, he realized that destiny often had a way of rearranging plans in ways the heart could never have anticipated. Elias stepped back, allowing the sisters a moment to breathe, and Coda took a slow, steadying step toward Mara. Her eyes met his, and he saw in them not only defiance but a quiet vulnerability, a challenge that made him aware of how much he wanted to be the one she could rely on. The ranch lay open around them, vast and serene, yet the real journey, the one of trust, understanding, and perhaps love, was only beginning. Coda knew it would not be simple, but he also knew that Mara's courage had given him the chance to find something rare and extraordinary, a woman who could match him in spirit, fire, and heart. That evening, the ranch was quiet. The kind of stillness that only comes after a long day of travel and revelations. The sky burned with the fading colors of sunset, casting gold and rose across the barns and pasture. The sisters had settled into a spare room in the main house, Lydia resting quietly while Mara wandered outside, pacing near the fence, her shadow stretching long across the soft grass. Coda followed at a careful distance, unsure how much space to give her, unsure how to approach the truth that had begun to stir in both their hearts. Mara paused, hands resting on the top rail of the fence, gaze sweeping the horizon. "I shouldn't have come," she said quietly, as if speaking to the wind. Coda stopped a few feet away, letting her words hang in the air before replying. "You shouldn't have?" His voice was careful. He had learned that Mara did not respond well to soft or idle conversation. She preferred truth, directness, and he intended to give it. "I didn't mean to," she began, twisting her hands nervously. "I wasn't supposed to be involved. Lydia was supposed to make this journey. I only wanted to protect her. I never intended to." Her words broke off as her gaze flicked to him, sharp, searching, and unexpectedly vulnerable. Coda stepped closer. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said firmly. "You protected your sister. That takes more courage than most people can muster in a lifetime." He hesitated, feeling the sudden weight of his own admission. "I can't pretend I don't notice you." Mara's eyes widened slightly. She had expected many things in this journey, but not a confession from a man who was supposed to be escorting her sister. Her chest tightened. She had always been careful, always alert, always the one who could read danger in a glance and act before it could strike. And now here she was, feeling the very thing she had avoided for years, being seen for who she truly was, not just as a sister or protector, but as a woman. "You shouldn't feel that way," she said softly, voice almost a whisper. She turned slightly, but not enough to leave him completely unseen. "You came here for another." "Not me." "I know," Coda admitted, stepping closer still. "But you are the one I noticed. From the moment I saw you on the platform, you made it impossible to look away. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And his gaze did not waver. "I don't regret it." Mara's fingers dug lightly into the wood of the fence as if grounding herself. Her heart raced, a mixture of fear, excitement, and disbelief. This was dangerous territory. She had been trained to protect, to lead, to never let her own heart dictate her choices, yet here she was, feeling something she could not control. "I only acted for Lydia," Mara said finally, voice steadier now. "She is my responsibility. I can't let anything happen to her. That was my choice, but my choice doesn't belong to me, not really." "And that is exactly why you matter," Coda said softly. "You acted out of love and courage, not obligation. You are brave, Mara, fierce, but not reckless." He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. "I am drawn to that. I am drawn to you. Not because you are Lydia's sister, not because of what you've done for her, but because of who you are. And I will not let that go." Mara's eyes shimmered in the fading light. She had prepared herself to face the world for her sister, to endure any hardship silently. She had not prepared herself for the honesty of a man who could see her so clearly, who could admit so openly that he noticed her in all her complexity. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, voice breaking slightly. "I never meant for this. My life isn't meant for." Coda lifted a hand, gently tilting her chin so that their eyes met. "You are allowed to choose, Mara. You don't have to live in shadows or for others. You can be seen and you can be wanted. I want you. Not the shadow of duty, not a name you were given, but you, your fire, your strength, your courage." Mara's breath caught. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope, to imagine a life not dictated solely by her responsibility for her sister, a life where her heart might finally have a voice. And in the quiet of the ranch, under the fading light of sunset, Mara realized that Coda's presence, steady and unwavering, had shifted the very path of her life. She did not speak immediately, only let her gaze soften. And Coda, understanding without a word, stood beside her, patient and present. The journey had begun with duty, but it was now moving towards something far more powerful, a connection neither of them had anticipated. Yet neither could deny. The morning air carried the scent of fresh hay and dew across the ranch. Birds sang softly in the distance, and the horses shifted in their stalls, stamping their hooves against the ground. Coda had risen early, as was his habit, but this morning, even the rhythm of the ranch could not distract him from the thoughts crowding his mind. Mara's presence lingered in his heart like a flame he could not extinguish, and he knew that he needed clarity, not just for himself, but for the sisters whose lives had become so entwined with his own. Elias stepped onto the porch as Coda approached, his cane tapping lightly against the wooden boards. The rancher's eyes were calm, steady, and observant, the kind that could see beyond words to intentions, to unspoken truths. Coda's chest tightened. He already sensed what Elias had likely realized. Mara's involvement had shifted everything. The journey meant to bring Lydia safely to her new home had instead revealed something neither man had anticipated. "You did well yesterday," Elias said, voice low but approving. "You handled things delicately, as I hoped." Coda nodded. "Thank you. But there is something I must discuss." "About the sisters." Elias regarded him quietly. "Go on," Coda took a deep breath. Lydia did not want this marriage. Mara has been protecting her, speaking for her, keeping her safe. That is why she traveled here, why she acted as she did. Elias's sharp gaze softened slightly. He had expected complications, but perhaps not the depth of loyalty and courage Mara had displayed. I see, he said. And you? Coda's hands curled into fists at his sides, heart hammering. I didn't expect to notice anyone but Lydia, but I did. Mara, she is the one I cannot ignore. From the moment I saw her on the platform, I knew something had changed. She is fierce, brave, and loyal in ways I admire. I cannot let that pass. Elias studied him for a long moment, then stepped back, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Then perhaps arrangements can be adjusted, he said gently. Lydia wishes to return east to family, yes? She does, Coda confirmed. Then there is no need to force her hand, Elias continued. And Mara? Mara may stay. You may stay, he added, glancing toward Mara, who had quietly approached the porch. Her dark eyes met his, filled with curiosity, caution, and a hint of hope. Coda's heart surged. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, feeling the weight of every moment that had led to this one. Mara remained still, letting him come, letting the moment unfold naturally. I rode here for a friend, Coda said, voice steady, though his chest raced. I was meant to escort Lydia to her new home, but I found the woman I am meant to stand beside instead. Mara, it is you? You were never the wrong sister. You were the one fate meant me to find. Mara's breath caught. She had always been prepared for duty, for responsibility, for protecting her sister. She had never expected words like these, spoken with such conviction, such clarity. Her chest tightened as she realized the truth she had been reluctant to admit. Her heart had already leaned toward him, and now, finally, the acknowledgement had come from him as well. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Though her voice carried more hope than fear. You don't need to say anything, Coda replied. You only need to choose. I will be here, waiting, ready, if you will have me. Mara's hand lifted slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The sun glinted in her eyes as she took a tentative step forward, closing the last few feet between them. She searched his face, reading the sincerity, the devotion, the quiet strength that had drawn her in from the start. I will stay, she said finally, a small but determined smile breaking across her face. Not for anyone else, but for me. And for you, Coda. He reached out, taking her hand gently but firmly, holding it as though he could anchor both of them to the moment. Mara's fingers curled around his, warmth and certainty passing between them, a silent promise of trust, courage, and the beginnings of love. At that moment, the ranch seemed to hold its breath. Lydia, quietly watching from the porch, smiled softly, understanding that her sister had found a chance at her own happiness, just as she had found relief in leaving the life she did not want. And Coda and Mara stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever the future might hold together. The journey had begun as a duty, but it had become far more. It had become the recognition that sometimes fate does not follow the plans we make, and that the heart often finds what it was always meant to discover. Even in the most unexpected circumstances, the morning sun spilled over the ranch, painting the barns and pastures in gold. The horses nickered softly in their stalls, and the distant mountains shimmered in the light of early warmth. Coda stood near the fence, Mara beside him, their hands still intertwined from the previous day's revelation. There was a quiet that was different from the tension-filled mornings of travel, a peace that came with clarity and choice. The kind of peace that comes when the heart has finally been seen and answered. Lydia had departed at first light, traveling east with arrangements made by Elias and the townspeople to ensure her safety. She waved from the wagon as it disappeared down the dusty road, her face glowing with relief and gratitude. Coda had watched her go with a small smile, knowing she was finally free of the life she had never wanted. Mara had stood quietly, holding her sister's hand a moment longer, a gentle squeeze that said more than words ever could. Then she had turned toward Coda, her gaze meeting his with a mixture of courage, hope, and a little disbelief. "You were right," Mara whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't expect any of this." Coda's thumb brushed across the back of her hand. "I never expected to feel this either," he admitted. "But here we are, and I know it is right. You are the woman I was meant to find." Mara's lips curved in a small, shy smile. She had always been the protector, the one who carried responsibility for her sister and often for everyone around her. She had built walls to ensure no one could get too close. Yet here was a man who did not flinch at her fire or try to change it. He accepted her as she was, with all her courage and strength, and in that acceptance, she found herself letting go of caution for the first time in years. The ranch stretched out before them, open and expansive, a symbol of freedom and possibility. Coda's eyes swept over the land, then returned to Mara. "This can be our beginning," he said quietly. "A place where we can choose how to live, together." Mara's heart skipped. She had spent years putting everyone else's needs before her own. Yet in his presence, she realized that she could finally make a choice for herself. The choice was simple and terrifying and thrilling all at once. "Together," she agreed, her voice gaining confidence as the words left her lips. Coda drew her closer, his hand still holding hers, fingers entwined. She did not resist. The warmth between them was grounding, a steady certainty that made the wind along the fence line feel like it belonged to them alone. Mara had imagined many futures for herself over the years, most of them cautious and safe. But none had felt as vivid as this one standing beside him. "I never thought a duty could turn into something like this," Coda said, smiling gently. "I came to deliver a bride to a friend, but fate had other plans." Mara laughed softly, the sound carrying over the pastures. "I suppose we should thank fate then," she said, her dark eyes sparkling. "And perhaps our stubborn hearts for refusing to follow the expected path." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence as they stood together, hands still entwined, hearts beating in unison. It was not the love of convenience, nor of duty fulfilled. It was something far more rare. It was the kind of love that finds you unexpectedly, insists on being noticed, and waits patiently until you are ready to recognize it. Coda looked down at Mara and found courage in her steady gaze. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we face it together. No one else's plans, no one else's expectations. Just us." Mara pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the strong, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "Just us," she agreed. The ranch spread out around them, alive with possibility. For the first time, Mara allowed herself to step into a life that was entirely her own, a life chosen not out of obligation, but out of love. Coda, who had come as a friend on a simple errand, had found his path forever altered by a woman who was fearless, loyal, and brilliant in ways he had never imagined. They turned together toward the horizon, hands still entwined, ready to walk into a future where every choice, every step belonged to them. The journey that had begun with duty and expectation had ended with freedom, with love, and with the unmistakable certainty that sometimes the right person comes along in the most unexpected way. And so, Coda and Mara began their new life, side by side, hearts aligned, and spirits unafraid of the unknown. In the vast openness of the ranch, beneath the endless sky, they had finally found each other, and in finding each other, they had discovered what it truly meant to be free.